Welcome to the Sports Watchdog Radio Show, hosted by Mason Kern. He keeps his nose to the ground to report on what's trending in professional and college sports, to inform, enlighten, and entertain. And now it's
the Sports Watchdog.
the Sports Watchdog, Mason Kern.
Hey there, everybody. You're listening to the Sports Watchdog Radio Show on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060 Phoenix. As always, I'm your host, Mason Kern, joining you every Sunday, and as usual, I have some great stuff, Mike Kennel. We're going to have two great interviews for you today, the first of which being with former boxer John Costello, and we'll also have an awesome interview, NCAA football related, with Dr. David Martin, who is a professor at Auburn University, so definitely some really exciting stuff. I also have some sports hot topics to get into with you from this past week, and also the always interesting happenings on the Hardwood for you basketball-specific fans. So keep it locked here. Going to be a great show for you guys. All right, guys, in sports hot topics this week, I think it goes without saying that we got to talk about the NFL and more specifically the conference championship games in the playoffs that propelled the Los Angeles Rams and obviously the New England Patriots into the Super Bowl, because it was pretty controversial in both games. Some calls by the referees, mainly talking about the New Orleans Saints against the Los Angeles Rams, that game, and kind of how that progressed. I mean, the call, or rather no call, that everyone is talking about is the pass interference. Basically, what happened here in this situation was you have a super tightly contested game. The Saints are driving, and you get kind of an open receiver. Drew Brees is leading this kind of fourth quarter kind of charge, which he's become so, famous for as one of the more elite quarterbacks in the NFL. But basically what happened, Nickel Roby-Coleman, he's playing defensive back for the Rams. He goes to stop the Saints receiver, Tommy Lee Lewis, and completely kind of disregards his place on the field, where the ball is coming in, and kind of keys in on Lewis and just kind of storms in, runs, and just absolutely decks Tommy Lee Lewis before the ball was even in his kind of range of a catch radius. And what people are arguing, there were two fouls kind of blatantly obvious on that play. One, pass interference, in that the receiver had no opportunity to make a play on the ball because, he was almost blatantly targeted on that play. But the second, the helmet-to-helmet collision, was also a violation of the league's rules, and the NFL actually did hand down a punishment for Roby-Coleman. They fined him $26,739 for his hit on Tommy Lee Lewis in that game. And that is kind of almost an acknowledgement that this should have been a penalty. This was not allowed in the sport. The fact that he's getting fined, it's an obvious no call that the referees didn't throw the flag, and obviously Saints fans are extremely disappointed by this because it kind of robbed them of a Super Bowl opportunity. If they get that first down, take the penalty, they have the opportunity to probably knee it, run out the clock, and maybe kick a field goal and win the game. You go into overtime then, and somehow you get the coin toss, you don't score, you are able to kind of convert, or you get the field goal, come down, kick a field goal to kind of win the game 26-23. Your Super Bowl chances, you're not going anymore. And it all kind of comes back to, what if the refs called this and we could have been able to take a knee, kick the field goal, win the game, into the Super Bowl. It was kind of as simple as that. It's obviously a tough pill really for Saints fans, it's a blow, especially after what happened last year. The Minnesota Miracle, if you remember, when the Vikings were able to win that game. Stephon Diggs kind of has real estate in Saints fans' heads now, but the refs now kind of blow it for you, but then again, you're not able to convert in overtime. That's kind of tough too. So that's just kind of my take on that whole situation. It was a blatantly obvious call that was missed, but there were still chances for the Saints to come and win the game in overtime, and they couldn't get it done. Disappointing for sure for the New Orleans Saints, but the Rams going to the Super Bowl, and going to be extremely interesting to see kind of who wins between the Patriots and this LA franchise and the Rams. All right, guys, don't go anywhere. The Sports Watchdog Radio Show on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060 Phoenix will be right back after this quick break.
If you're losing your hair or notice that it's getting thinner, listen closely. You can do something about it without messy lotions or drugs. Now you can get clinically proven hair growth results at home with the Hair Max Laser. Hair Max delivers nourishing laser light energy to stimulate hair growth right at the roots. It's FDA cleared, recommended by doctors, and best of all, it has an amazing 93% success rate in clinical studies in both men and women, so you can be sure it works. Use it just 3 times a week and experience new hair growth, increased density, and healthier, fuller, more attractive hair in just weeks with a 5-month money-back guarantee. Now, for a limited time, save 15% on your Hair Max order at hairmax.com. Type in code RADIO at checkout or call 1-800-9REGROW. That's hairmax.com, code RADIO, or 1-800-9REGROW. Experience real hair growth and save 15% with Hair Max.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Sports Watchdog Radio Show on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060 Phoenix. I'm your host, Mason Kern, and joining us now is John Costello, the former boxer and the current Vice President of Business Development and Government Relations for Microsemi Corporation. John has a really interesting story to tell, and I'm really excited to get into the newest book that he authored called Executive Hoodlum. But with that, John is here to share more of his story. Hey, John, welcome to the Sports Watchdog Radio Show. So glad you could join us today.
Hi, Mason. Thanks for that introduction. I sound really important on paper.
Yeah, I'm really excited to kind of get into your story a little bit. But first, before we kind of delve into it, can you just kind of tell us a little bit about your upbringing? I know you grew up in Chicago, and how that kind of molded the path for the rest of your life.
Yeah, actually, I bounced back and forth from Los Angeles to Chicago. I came out to Los Angeles when I was very young. My father and mother divorced very early, and all things kind of went haywire when I was about 10. So my mother was beaten very severely into a coma, basically, and when she came out, she took to drinking. She had a bad blood transfusion where she was contracted hepatitis B. So the bottom line is, as I began resenting my father and had to move in with his new family after getting out of foster care, I kind of grew up a little bit on the angry side, chip on my shoulder, and preferred to spend my summers in Chicago with my cousins, who are a bit more on the rougher end, certainly from my California friends and Los Angeles friends. So it kind of shaped the way, the way I am, or the edginess, I suppose, which was a little bit different when I came to California, because the dichotomy of being in the streets of Chicago and then being in the kid in the San Fernando Valley going to school there was a very, very different culture.
Right, I'm sure. And I mean, obviously such tragedy being so young. I mean, I'm sure that also kind of helped kind of mold you into who you've become today and everything. And especially, like you say, just going to Chicago, living with your cousins, staying with them, and kind of that molding you. So how then did that lead you to get into fighting and amateur boxing? And was that kind of like an outlet for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In other words, sports was really my sanctuary for to escape the family life. I played Pop Warner football and I played Little League baseball. But when I had to move in with my father and his new family, which it was kind of a shock, because we had no idea this was going on until the passing of our mother. That base sports, like the traditional sports of baseball, football, basketball I was playing in little leagues and stuff like that, went away. So I kind of fell behind the learning curve there. But interestingly enough, my father, because of his street nature, he would pull up to our house when he didn't live there, and he used to like to play this game, Who's the Toughest Kid on the Block. So he'd pull up and I'd be there with my friends, and he would basically antagonize you enough where you end up fighting with your friends. So I did that in about every neighborhood. So I kind of had a baseline skill. And as I got older, I formalized my training in the Cal Youth organizations, some other Catholic youth organizations, and went to various gyms in Los Angeles and Chicago, because I already had a baseline skill set in fighting, whereas I had fallen behind the learning curve on the traditional sports. So as I got into sports in high school and college, they were more physically demanding sports like middle distance and track and In college, I was captain of the rowing team. So those were physically demanding sports that would complement my skill set in boxing from the conditioning standpoint. So, and of course, growing up in Chicago and going back there and telling them that I was captain of the rowing team didn't really go over so well. I mean, these guys broke my balls absolutely relentlessly, saying, hey, ain't that the sport you sit on your ass and go backwards? So, being an elitist sport and then what some people consider a ghetto sport was, I guess, it kind of defined my life, really.
Right, and I mean, I'm sure kind of just being able to kind of have that sanctuary through sports and kind of escape. I mean, so many people kind of, I'm sure, can relate to that. But do you have a favorite memory or a moment that stands out to you just from your time competing in the ring?
Well, absolutely. It was I think my 1986 Golden Gloves, because I got to fight at the iconic Olympic Auditorium. I was interesting because I'd been in so many athletic events, and this was post-college. This was after I graduated college. So I had some of my corporate buddies there, and I had some of my high school friends and a couple of college friends sitting ringside, and I fought well. The problem is I ended up breaking my hand on the guy's head in the third round because I was trying to show off. I pretty much had the fight won, and I was like, oh, my friends are, I want to, show off a little bit, and I ended up catching a guy on the top of his head and broke a bone or fractured a bone in my hand, which did not allow me to move on to the next round. And I think that was a semifinal or a quarter. I forget which, it was the final or semifinal, but I knew that I had a bye in the next round, so I would have went right to the final. So that was what I remember. And the other thing I remember is warming up in the dressing room because they had all the old nostalgic stuff there from the 50s, 60s, and
right.
the 70s. When they had the roller derby there. So I saw the scoreboard said the T-Birds, and I don't know if you remember roller derby, but the T-Birds were the LA team, and it just some of the nostalgic things. Bob, was it the Golden Boy? Aragon was the one that I believe made that venue famous, and so being able to fight in such a nostalgic place, that's my biggest memory as it pertains to whatever fight stood out the most.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's seemingly pretty. I mean, being in that environment for sure, and then having that success, obviously. I mean, until you broke your hand, that's kind of tough. But I know, like I said in the intro, you authored a book, Executive Hoodlum, as well. What kind of led you to writing that in the first place and it taking off?
Funny enough, I had no intention of writing a book. I had befriended over the years. I'd met Larry Elder, who's a best-selling author, and he's a radio personality and a TV personality. I think he's got a syndicated. He does have a syndicated talk show. He over the years, I would tell him stories. He knew me more as a corporate guy, and the more I told him about my family and stuff like that, he thought I was I was embellishing, that I wasn't telling the truth. And when I invited him to my 50th birthday party, he ended up meeting quite a few of the people that I spoke about. And, some of these guys are notorious guys that you only read about in the paper. And they shared some of the same stories during my 50th roast, if you will, that I had told them in the past. So then it became very real. And he sat down with me at lunch a week later and suggested I write a book. And then first I'm thinking, you're out of your mind. I don't want to get myself killed. I think there's a lot of guys that I still know that are involved in illegal activity. And last thing I wanted to do was think about it. So after some careful forethought and some calls to Chicago, I decided to do it, and I decided to do it for three main reasons. Mainly is kind of therapeutic for me. There are certain things you don't deal with as a kid, and you have attitudes that you had as a kid, and as an adult looking back at them, you may think differently. So that was part of it. Another part was I was a volunteer trainer in the gyms out here in this little section of Newhall, where I was a community volunteer and taught kids boxing, some of the underprivileged kids. And it was very gratifying work to help these kids that had no hope, find some hope and some confidence by not only teaching them boxing, but counseling them on the finer things in life. I mean, they see me coming in a suit, driving a nice car. That's somebody they may want to emulate rather than just some guy that comes in and preaches to them. If I'm in the ring with them mixing it up, and then at the same time I'm out there being successful in a career, I think the credibility is a lot better, and they tend to listen more. And the last reason was I wanted my kids to have a legacy, so when they're old enough they can read it and realize that the reason they have a nice standard of living was because of say, the trials and tribulations that got them there. Otherwise, they'd be growing up in the streets of Chicago, just like some of my other cousins, and end up in jail or dying of overdoses or getting killed or killing themselves, because that's all happened. And there's stories in the book that detail that.
Right, yeah, and I'm sure there's so many interesting stories that people would love to read and get all the info on. John, we're running out of time. Where can our listeners go to get more info or to get the book or just to connect with you?
Executive Hoodlum. I have my own website that connects directly to Amazon to buy the book. I hope you like it. There is a film deal in the works that has already been signed. The pilot will be written by, I believe, March. And so I'm kind of excited about it, but at the same time, I'm a little nervous about it. So this is a very strange industry to me. I'm in the high reliability semiconductor business, not the entertainment business.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people are going to be really excited to get a look at the pilot and read the book as well. John, thank you again so much for your time. All right, everyone, the Sports Watchdog Radio Show on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060 Phoenix will be right back after this short break.
Hey, travel lovers, if you want to up your luggage game, check out EagleCreek.com, an innovative and durable line that's sustainably made with PVC-free materials. One stellar option is the Orv Trunk 36, a big bag crafted for big adventure. It's hard to find upright luggage that puts as much into durable, useful features as this one does. Built with all explorers in mind, the Orv Trunk 36 is lightweight, dependable, and efficient, with wet and dry compartments, multi-point handles, a cargo net for internal compression or outside gear attachment, puncture-resistant lockable zippers, central lock point security, oversized treaded wheels, padded laptop sleeves, and more. This luggage seemingly has it all. It even has a key fob porter key bottle opener. Plus, there's free shipping on all orders and a no-matter-what lifetime warranty. Shop now at EagleCreek.com. That's EagleCreek.com.
Hey there and welcome back. You're listening to the Sports Watchdog Radio Show on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060 Phoenix. I'm your host, Mason Kern, and joining us now is Dr. David Martin, an associate professor at Auburn University in the Hospitality Management Program. David recently published an article about how sports fans perceive the game of college football, especially when it comes to the unscripted, on-the-field violence that sometimes occurs. So David is here to reveal his findings and give us some more info into this line of research. With that, hey David, welcome to the Sports Watchdog Radio Show. So glad you could join us today.
Thanks, Mason. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, really appreciate you taking the time. So first off, how did you just kind of get interested in this line of research in the first place?
Sure. So a lot of my research up to this point has been about fan and fan identity. And as a young graduate student, I was told that the best research is always introspective. And so I guess I really was trying to figure out why I and people around me got so excited about watching 18 to 20-year-old kids run around on a big green field and spend a bunch of money, time, and energy surrounding college football. I grew up a huge college football fan. I still consider myself a college football fan. And so this research was kind of a natural progression about my interest in what drives fans and why we are so adamant and in love with college football.
Right, and what did you find then in kind of undergoing this research? What were kind of your results?
So I think probably the biggest takeaway from this is that highly identified or really big college football fans look at violence on the field very differently than people who are not fans of college football. And what we found is that the college football fans are very desensitized. And the area of the brain that we saw the most difference in compared to when comparing fans to non-fans was the part of the brain that is responsible for empathy. And so what these findings kind of indicate is that the college football fans, while they recognize that a player has been injured on the field, they're not necessarily able to empathize with that individual like a non-fan is. And so there seems to be some type of disconnect between the injuries and the violence that are happening on the field and how it's actually perceived by those college football fans.
And in order for, that empathy to kind of, is there any remedy, I guess, for these college football fans to kind of get that empathy back somehow, or is it kind of too little, too late?
That's a good question. I think it's hard to say without more research looking at the phenomena specifically. I would say probably the first step, though, is awareness, right? I think a lot of fans probably don't realize just how desensitized they are to that violence. And so that's why this research is significant and that this is the first step into really determining that that desensitization has occurred, and then later on, as the research matures, we can get into looking at how do we make fans more aware of that and connect in a more significant way to players that are injured through college football.
Right, and I mean, obviously, football, I mean, it's an inherently dangerous sport. I mean, violent, and obviously, injuries will happen. It kind of goes the same for any sport, really, but if rules are put in place and the game becomes safer, do you think then that college football might lose or run the risk then of losing more fans who are desensitized to those injuries, or do you think that doesn't really correlate?
No, I think there's definitely a possibility. I think college football is having to walk a very fine line and really find a sweet spot of keeping players safe, which is something I think that most people can agree we want to do as much as possible, but also with the understanding that unscripted violence has been found by previous researchers and then in this research to be one of the main stimuli that attracts people to the sport itself. So on the one hand, you want to maximize player safety, but if you sanitize it too much, then you do, I think, run the risk of alienating fans and possibly losing viewership and losing attendance. I think one of the remedies to that is making changes slowly over time. If you were to just implement 10 new rule changes that really eliminated a lot of big hits and heavy tackling in college football, for the start of the next season, it would be very hard for fans to absorb that. But if you make changes slowly over time, it becomes easier for fans to digest some of those changes.
Right, yeah, I mean, definitely. I think I definitely agree. If the bigger rule changes are kind of implemented right away, then people already don't like change, especially in the sports they love. So yeah, small changes definitely would probably be the route to go. But what do you think then is kind of the long-term, I guess, prognosis for college football? Is there more of a risk of fans not viewing the sport as intensely and as passionately, or do you think college football is still on the rise?
No, I think there's definitely a chance for college football to run into some issues over the next 10 to 15 years. Some of that is going to be connected to the emerging research on CTE and head injuries.
Right.
As we know more about CTE and head injuries, we then, I think, have a responsibility to try to prevent those injuries and increase player safety. And that's where you kind of run into a brick wall, if you will. If we're going to make the game safe and prevent all of these traumatic head injuries, how do we enact rules that will do that but also keep the fan engaged? And that is going to be a very, I think, difficult proposition as that CTE research matures. Obviously, a lot of that will depend on what the actual injury rate is, and we don't know right now. But once we have that information, we're able to conduct some longitudinal studies and say for certain that if somebody's to play high school and college football, that they have, let's say, a 50% chance of incurring a permanent brain injury or traumatic brain injury. How do we respond to that as at an institution of higher education in college football? That's a difficult proposition, I think, to tackle.
Right, yeah, and that's a question I'm sure that's the answers are going to be kind of looked for as this sport and this kind of research is still being conducted. But in terms of your kind of personal research into this topic, what are kind of the next steps now that you've kind of discovered this, and where are you kind of going from here?
Yeah, I think one of the next projects that we really want to look at is conducting a similar experiment, but actually using coaches, training staff, and medical staff. I think we all understand that, especially when you get to elite competition, that those players are probably going to be their worst advocates when it comes to injuries.
Right.
They understand that they got to play in order to stay on scholarship, to get to the NFL, and ultimately that's what their dream is. So playing hurt and being tough is part of the mantra of being a successful football player. So you have kind of this thin red line, if you will, with the coaches, with the trainers, with the medical staff to almost protect the players from themselves. If we see this level of desensitization in fans that are watching, X amount of games during the course of the season, how many more of these types of injuries have the medical staff and the trainers seen because they're in practice and they've been doing it a long time? It would be really interesting to see if some of this kind of unintentional desensitization has occurred in the medical staff and the training folks that would potentially prohibit them from protecting the players from themselves as much as we would want them to. Obviously, it's unintentional, but an important baseline reading that we need to get.
Right, yeah, definitely an interesting kind of prospect there for sure. And just last thing for you, is this only a college football kind of issue for fans, or does this kind of extend into the NFL or even the high school level as well?
That's a great question. The research that we conducted was just on college football fans, so I can't really extrapolate these results onto those other populations.
Right.
My gut feeling would be that you would probably find this across all levels, high school, college, and professional football. I think one of the things that might be working against college football is these players, they're wearing pads, they're wearing a helmet that covers their face. They almost look larger than life on the field. And so that might be part of the reason why it's hard for us to have as much empathy for some of these players when they suffer some of these injuries. I think if you look at, Fox Sports in the NFL, for NFL games, they have, robots and have animations as, in between timeouts and that type of thing that look like players. So it's almost like you're making the equivalency of the player being like a robot. And so then you start to see these results where people are having trouble empathizing with those players, and that's an interesting connection, I think.
Yeah, definitely really interesting for sure, and we'll have to reconnect to see kind of where this leads in the future. But Dave, we're running out of time. Thank you so much. Where can our listeners go to get more info or just to connect with you?
Sure. They can look me up on the web at Auburn University's website, www.auburn.edu, or if they just do a Google search, David S. Martin, fMRI research, this article will come right up.
Well, there you go, guys. Make sure to go look them up online. Check out the article as well. David, thank you so much again. All right, everyone, the Sports Watchdog Radio Show on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060. Be right back after this commercial break.
For singers looking for a fun, all-in-one wireless karaoke mic with a built-in mixer speaker and its own light show, Voco Pro's pop-up Oki microphone is for you. It connects to a smartphone or tablet via Bluetooth and accesses YouTube and numerous karaoke apps for hours of entertainment. An onboard MP3 player allows singers to perform recorded MP3 tracks. Its multicolored LED light with on-off switch will automatically dance to the beat of the music, adding visual excitement to any karaoke session. Find it at vocopro.com.
You ready to hoop it up? This is Happenings on the Hardwood.
All right, guys, as always, at the end of the Sports Watchdog Radio Show here on NBC Sports Radio, AM 1060 Phoenix, it's your favorite segment. We're turning it over to the Hardwood. It's Happenings on the Hardwood, and guys, I mean, a lot of stuff coming out of the NBA this week. It feels like it's been a while, but just because so much has kind of happened, kind of most notably, I would say, is Memphis, the Grizzlies, man. I mean, they were once such a dominant team with their kind of big three. You got Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, and Zach Randolph. Kind of that whole culture down there, perennial playoff team. And that's kind of going away now, obviously, with Zach Randolph's departure. He's kind of the veteran presence in Sacramento now. But it's been reported that both Marc Gasol and Mike Conley, kind of the backbone for this Memphis Grizzlies kind of grit and grind era, they're being shopped. They were informed by the owner who gave them a call that both kind of their star players are being shopped to see what they can possibly get in the trade. And I don't know if the tank is necessarily on for this season, but, I mean, Jaren Jackson Jr. has been kind of a real positive, playing pretty well. I mean, he had a game winner over LeBron against the Lakers at one point this season. That was one highlight I remember from him. But, I mean, Memphis, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see if Marc Gasol and Mike Conley kind of stick together in a package, or if they get shopped and dealt separately. But they understand. I mean, in interviews this week, they've said, hey, I get it's a business, but my love for Memphis is never going to change. And obviously that's really good to see from your kind of star duo and the pioneers of that grit and grind era. Definitely really cool to see, although, I mean, since that is kind of crumbling, falling to an end a little bit, it's kind of bittersweet for sure. But James Harden, in other news, putting up wicked numbers still, had 61 against the Knicks at Madison Square Garden the other night. And, I mean, this dude is putting up MVP numbers. I really don't know if it's sustainable into playoff time, because he's playing at such an elite level right now. I mean, probably the top chart for the MVP right now. I was debating him or Giannis earlier in the season, but what Harden's doing right now is pretty remarkable. Just the offensive production that he's really putting out for the Rockets. But if he isn't able to sustain this level of play and he gets a little burned out come playoff time, that really is going to hurt the Rockets because, sure, you want to get the best seed possible, but you also don't want your star player to be burned out by the time you actually want to make a run in the playoffs. Well, that's a wrap, everyone. Anybody wanting to connect with me, the Sports Watchdog, on Twitter can do so at @SportsWatchdog, and on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as well at The Sports Watchdog. So until next time, keep your eye on the ball.
The Sports Watchdog. The Sports Watchdog, Mason Kern.